Okay. There, that's the sound for which we were waiting. All
Yeah,
right.
right.
Now we are set. Welcome, everyone. And Matt Geary has joined us as a superintendent of schools representative. So welcome, Matt. Anything you wanted to say, ask before we get started?
No, thanks. Just happy to be here.
Excellent. Wonderful. Again, welcome. So let me share my screen. All right, so then we'll get the minutes. All right. Can everyone see those?
Yeah,
A little bit bigger, maybe? Does that help?
it's perfect. Thank you.
All right, great. All right, so there the meeting call to order. Documents. Well, you can just skim this if you wouldn't mind.
This is a very comprehensive, Taylor. Thank you.
They really are.
Try.
Should we entertain a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Christopher. Is there a second?
Second.
Who was that, please? Jennifer? Good, thank you. Any discussion? Anything about the minutes? All right, then. Anyone or everyone in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody? Perfect. Anybody opposed? Anyone abstaining? Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Now I will go back to a lot of things open here. Get rid of this. There's the agenda. So the next thing is the report. And I really want to thank Christopher once again, as I did when I sent it out, because he really had a vision for this report. And it's almost done. That part we're still waiting for to review the current legislation and compare that to the recommendations we made last year. So we hope to get that information next week. So for before the next meeting, we hope to have that updated. Then we will, if we get that information, and then share it with you again with any other changes from today. And then we should be able to, we would hope, approve the report. And then that would be the conclusion of the committee. So what do you think about going over the report? Is that all right with everyone? So I'll turn it over to Christopher in just a second here because he's really got a lot. The beginning is just our charges. And it's followed by the membership. One person did write in, we made a change there. Anything on those pages that you have for a question or comment? If you do, please just let us know.
Wait, did we add Matt?
Oh, no, thank you.
Okay, actually, I can do that now.
Thank you. Let's do that. Because I hadn't heard from him and then we did because it's all happened recently. So yes.
Matt,
thank-
do you prefer Matt or Matthew?
You can use Matt.
Here and Matt Gary, Superintendent, Manchester Public Schools. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. And then our process, again, not too long. And I've highlighted or put in red on page 4 for next month, as we have done with the previous reports. Hopefully we'll be able to say that we have finished and then have that vote. So then, actually looking through a little bit more of the process here, maybe Christopher, you want to start here with this? Would you be okay with that?
Yeah, sure. You know, essentially, and I went back and I drew a lot on work that we had done in previous reports because we've now submitted, this is our fourth. We had submitted two sort of unique reports, and then our second report was sort of an update to what had happened subsequent to our first report. So this is now our fourth. So I went back and I drew a lot on the work that we had done before, you know, since it's all germane. But I just sort of introduced, you know, why this topic is so important. You know, drawing upon, you know, research literature about, you know, how COVID has impacted families and so on and so forth. And then we collected different kinds of data. We had done a survey of school counselors. So I sent out I sent an email with a link to a survey through the Connecticut School Counselor Association, and 6 school counselors reported. And then I also sent it to through the Connecticut Community Action Alliance, and 7 community action agency leaders replied. So we had 13 discrete responses. There were 3 questions that all 13 people were able to respond to, and then there was 1 question that was specific to school counselors. So this section is really just person by person, question by question, you know, their responses. And the survey questions were drawn almost verbatim from the charges that the legislature had given to us. You know, and long and short, I think the big takeaways were that, you know, people almost to a person said that COVID had exacerbated existing problems. It hadn't caused the problems, but it had certainly exacerbated them. Mental health was a significant factor that was brought up time and again. Academic not academic gaps, not academic, you know, but basically, you know, kids not being where they should be, both academically but also developmentally and behaviorally. And so, you know, I basically just sort of went through over pages reporting what each of them had said, but then I summed it up. Trying to think what page I started the summing up on. Yeah, so page 18 is where the summary is. And so, you know, from greatest responses to least, you one of the questions was, which federally funded programs should continue with state funding? And so the counselors, began by saying, and which school-based programs have been funded with federal funds that should continue with the state money. And the counselors reported, additional academic supports for students, social and emotional supports for students, food assistance for students and families, and technology supports for students and families. And then the last, but not by much, was supports for school staff. Because the school staff have been increasingly overburdened, certainly during COVID, but also subsequent to that. And then also some physical improvements had started to be made to schools with COVID money, and some of the counselors indicated that such improvements should continue. Then the next question was the out-of-school programs, and that was posed to both counselors and community action agency heads. And here's where the mental health crisis sort of really emerged, where, across the board, counselors and agency heads talked about the need for counseling services for young people and for families, but then also talked about academic or enrichment opportunities for young people beyond the school day. Because, so many kids struggled so much as a result of COVID. The community action agency heads also talked about food assistance programs, because those were in huge demand beginning with COVID, and they've continued to be. Continued funding to bridge the digital divide, and then funding for housing support and energy and fuel assistance, because families are really hurting, and the community action agency folks definitely see that. Then the next question was about, the gaps between where kids and families are and where they ought to be. And here again, in order of, in decreasing order of urgency, socially, emotionally, and mentally, kids are challenged, they're struggling. Then there's the concerns with academic gaps and school disengagement. The next one was that families' lack of access to digital tools, and the lack of adequate staff members to meet kids and families' needs in the social service agencies. And then still lack of access to basic necessities such as food and adequate housing. And again, time and again, reading people's raw responses, they were saying, like, COVID didn't cause these were existing problems that COVID has made markedly worse. And then the last question that I asked of both groups, because you'll recall that the legislature in their charge to us really were focused on how kids who had graduated from high school in 2020 through 2023 had been impacted. And we as a group were certainly interested in that particular population of kids, but we wanted, I think, collectively not to limit our focus to that 3-year span of, kids who are now outside of high school. So I had asked the question sort of generically about, which groups of kids or adolescents had been particularly impacted. And so none of the people who responded to the survey, either counselors or community actions leaders, mentioned that group of people. So I think that's, I don't think they're saying, and we're certainly not saying, that particular group of young people weren't impacted at all. But it wasn't a group that was top of mind for any of our respondents to the survey. So again, in decreasing order of urgency, they expressed that kids who had learning disabilities and or emotional disabilities, as well as young people from families earning low incomes, were the most negatively impacted. The school counselors pointed out that their multi-language learners and their English language learners had also been negatively impacted. I think because the groups aren't mutually exclusive, a smaller number talked about young people of color. But I think young people of color are also certainly included in the other two groups that have already been mentioned. And then when people did talk about specific age groups, people talked about infants and toddlers and preschool age children, and some others, although a smaller number, talked about adolescents. So they were talking, I think the respondents were talking more globally about kids, not so much about specific age groups. But certainly none of them mentioned the kids in that particular age band that the legislature had pointed out. And I was careful when so as I say before, the questions were worded generically, but the email that invited people to participate in the survey included verbatim the charges from the legislature. So that, you know, it shouldn't have escaped their notice that, you know, while we weren't interested exclusively in that group, we were still interested in hearing about that group. So those were the data that we collected directly from respondents, the 13 respondents. Additionally, Alicia had gone through the Blue Ribbon Panel report, because last year when we were working sort of in parallel with the Blue Ribbon Panel. And their report came out sort of right when we were finishing our work. So, Alicia, I don't know if you wanted to highlight anything from the Blue Ribbon report that you cited.
Right, I think it fits well with what you found, that one of the groups of concern was the very young, you know, the preschool. And so here we go. This fits right along with that. And so much work was done. We knew we wanted to call attention to it. So it really did fit right in. There's been a big investment already. There is a plan, and we know that that really needs to continue and the funding for that. So the whole report is there, and the objectives really are right there. So we weren't going to repeat them all, but just to reinforce the importance of that age group and that work. And hopefully Jennifer thinks that kind of works too with what she had been involved. And then after that, an important part of was attendance and the change. And I know this year, luckily, we've really seen a nice, really, it's not luck, it's hard work, that's seen a change and an improvement in the attendance. And this program that really has caught the attention of many in the country, I think is the reason. So I had talked to people like Caroline, and got some great information, and you can actually see the importance of this work here. And I also talked to Kari from the Department of Education, so you can really see the decline and how important it is to have you know, to have those visits and to really work with children, because even though COVID is gone, this problem is not. It's getting better, but it's seemingly going to need ongoing attention. So I wanted to call that, because otherwise you'll have a problem. You know, every year, if you don't address it, of course, the most important thing is getting them there. If they're not there, the learning, you know, can't follow up. And there's, you know, the video in there that has great testimonials. I was going to do some more work with that. And I said, well, you know, let's put these things here if you get the idea of it. But if you have any other, you know, questions about it or ideas, I'm certainly open to how we you know, prepared this. And then Christopher, you wanted to do the commission?
Yeah, so I mean, as you all know, and I think we were talking about it before, the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities was working with funding from Dalio Education, and they had the 119K Commission, which across the past year did sort of listening tours across the state, you know, fact finding about the crisis of disengaged young people in Connecticut. And I think, you know, a lot of what ended up in that report were things that we had been discussing and making recommendations about since we began our work together as a group. So we linked to the report here and we just sort of underscored how a lot of the kinds of things that were illuminated through the survey and through the other documents that Alicia just mentioned were also addressed in this report.
So any questions so far in all of this? Because then we're going to get to review some of these projects. Let's continue that and then we can see what people have for. Want to start? Oh,
I do have a question.
Please.
So with this survey, and you said it only went out to the Connecticut Council of School Counselors.
Yeah, it was the Connecticut School Counselor Association. And then it also went out through the Community Action Network.
Okay. And I'm not sure the number, I don't know the membership of that Connecticut Council for School Counselors, and I don't know if every school counselor across the state is a member of the association, but 6 just seems like a small size for a response. Because just looking on Ed's site, there's over 1,600 school counselors identified across the state. So I don't know how that would look for us from a data and, you know, and the feedback standpoint. If we know there's over 1,600 school counselors, but it's only went to one small group. Again, I don't know their membership. And there are only
No,
6
and I think that's
responses.
a fair point. You know, for sure, it's not a representative sample. But I think it would, at the very least, it's sort of illustrative because there are people providing, you know, there's direct quotes in there. So
Sure, and I'm not discounting that at all. I'm just saying we'll
Yeah.
need to be ready for when this is presented
sure.
and how to address that.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to, the report I linked through in the agenda, is that the same one that you're sharing?
Yes.
It is, okay.
Yes.
I
It's also on the website, Irene, if you can't get it through the agenda.
have it through the agenda, but I'm just trying to find, I saw some new information presented here, so I don't know why it's not syncing. So I think it is important, though, if we're referring to the 119K, we may want to include some data that to show more of like the representation within that group. And I have to go back and I'm going through the 2 screens, but we know that 56,000 of the 119,000 or 47% are learners that are in school and labeled as at risk or disengaged. But we also know that 63,000 of the 119,000 or 53% are out of school and labeled disconnected, but there are 8,000 of them already employed, another 8,000 have college degrees, and another 20,000 are not in the labor force. So I want to put that in this space because I think it's just important to understand what's behind that number, which is a large number, 119,000, but there's other information. And I can certainly share that with you. That is information we've shared with our board, our state board. Again, if we're referencing that, I want to also make sure that there's that understanding as well.
Yeah, please share it. Thank you.
Yeah, we can just definitely add that to that section for sure.
Yeah, that kind of is almost a response to if we had some kind of rebuttal, because how do you possibly have access to those students who are gone from our system? We don't really have that. So this is a one way to say we address that. It's very helpful, Irene.
Okay, so I will find a way to share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, and we embedded a link to the full report so people could see it.
Right.
And interestingly, later on in this document, we still have our original list of recommendations is at the bottom, and there's lots of citations, a lot of them from
I'm on my task
Cursor
force meeting that you
reports.
put me on.
Anne Marie, can you put yourself on mute, please?
Oh,
She is. Go ahead.
Yeah, so yeah, Irene, if you get us that information, we'll go right ahead and add it to this section. And then the last bit that we had included, because the legislature, you know, the big charge was, you know, for us to look at the programs that had been funded with federal monies that the legislature should fund permanently with state funds. And so we went through and I still have it here on my desk. This big giant document, program by program. Basically, I went through all of them and identified which ones. And not every single one of them, mind you, because some of them were very time specific. It was a one-time thing to deal with a specific project. And there were a lot of them that were small, there were monies that were going to individual towns for, playground equipment or that sort of thing. But the larger, bigger ticket items, I went through and cited them, and I categorized them according to the 5 tenets of the whole child that we had been using before and that guide our recommendations. And so it was interesting because at the end of the day, the federal government had sort of pumped $2.8 billion into the state, $2.8 billion of COVID relief money. And the programs that need to be long-term and that are directly related to our 5 categories add up to slightly less than half of that. And so I just listed them here, and I sort of consolidated them too, because some of them had little bits of money here and little bits of money there. So I just in bold gave the project number or numbers and titles, and then I explained briefly what they were and how much. And if I consolidated them, I shared the consolidated total.
So if you look at healthy, right, start with that, Christopher, you think? Any
Say it
questions?
again?
If people have any questions under healthy, start with
Oh,
that.
please. Yep.
If we missed anything or.
And I think a lot of what folks have been talking about since we've been meeting since September,
Yes.
I think are addressed here. I know the things that Christine had talked about, the things that Mark had talked about, the things that sorry, Tanya had talked about. I think Tracy, are sort of listed here.
I just have a comment, if that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yes.
Of course.
Because I do have to hop off soon, but I just want to make an overall statement. This is really great. That's a lot of work, you pulling all these services out of that huge document. I appreciate that. I just want to make sure our report is very clear on, like, we outline things that were funded through legislation and whatnot, but a lot of them are becoming, I don't want to say defunded, but basically the funding runs out. So, they may look green on our report, but in theory, we're going back to having no funding for some of this. So I don't want it to look, if someone's peeking at it and be like, oh, that's already taken care of, don't have to worry about that. But just so we're very clear on, well, hey, the money is ending and here are all these programs.
And that's a good point, because I'm wondering whether, we don't want to give the false impression that just because they had taken some action.
Like it was taken
they're
care of,
not,
but it's
right.
not like taken care of forever,
No, and I think what we'll do, and I think this is where we'll need you, like, we haven't updated those yet because we're,
Okay.
it was election season till last night.
Yeah.
God help us. And,
yeah, so we don't know where
Taylor's gonna get
probably
us.
a lot of this is gonna end up, and yeah,
Right.
okay, so the 24 stuff wasn't updated yet in that chart. Okay, that makes a
No.
lot more sense to me now, because I'm
Yeah,
like,
no, so Taylor is going to, I think she's already put out the calls
Yeah,
several times, but people haven't, because they were busy, haven't had the
Yes.
chance to update her. So she's hoping to we'll definitely have that information well in
Okay.
advance of our next meeting.
okay, that makes a lot more sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
And we'll
and
share the report with you again, the revised report. before the
But
next-
please do.
Yeah.
At that section, Alicia and I will go through and include the information that Taylor gives us. But if you have additional information like,
Yes.
oh, this is actually time limited, let us know, because we can make sure it's very clearly spelled out that there was this money, but the money runs out on a date certain. So,
Thanks, Christine.
yeah. Irene, did you have another thought or question? Okay.
I did, thank you. I'm wondering in this report, because these are like the bigger, these are the state agencies, and maybe that's the intent of just highlighting the state agencies that use their relief funding set aside or whatever was allocated. But how do we capture what districts did? Because I know from the State Department of Education, we put the majority of the funds at the district, at the local level, and they too were implementing programs aligned to the 5 statewide priorities that the commissioner had identified. And there's a lot in there for safety, for for acceleration of learning, for family and community engagement, nutrition. So I'm just wondering, how do we in this report say something about what was happening at the local level? Or maybe that's not the purpose of this.
Do you wish to continue those offerings? Do we need to? Because it will be the purpose if that's what you want to suggest, that we really need to continue that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it sounded like we were doing like this retrospective of what was. So I'm misunderstanding. And so these are those projects that were identified that we're proposing to the legislation to continue. Okay, all right.
Yeah, and I think a lot of them, just like you're saying, you know, even though it says here in this document, because it said in this document that the money went to the Department of Education, we know that those monies didn't. I mean, you're not living high in the hog up there. The money's
So
been-
our aim was to push it out,
absolutely.
majority of it, yes, so it could happen at that local
Yeah,
level.
so
statewide, yes.
what we did was the ones that were the $2.8 billion worth of spending are all included here, and we went through and picked out the ones that should be continued but with state money. And yeah, so if they're in here, we're recommending that they continue to be funded. Yeah.
Because I think the learning from all of this work too is identifying and prioritizing those strategies and those projects or programs that actually did make an impact and make a difference. And so hopefully recognizing that and that they can continue, and certainly locally outside of these agencies. But
And if when you're sending us the other information you're going to send us, if you have a paragraph or two or something that's already been written that you'd like us to work into the narrative, we can definitely do that.
okay. All right, my apologies for misunderstanding for a moment.
Oh, no,
Again,
not
it
at
sounded
all.
like a retrospective, and that's why I wanted to honor what the districts were
Absolutely.
doing with this.
I think there would just be so much. We didn't have time to do all of that too.
Understood.
So,
Yeah, no, I agree. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Safe. Anything there from anyone?
I think this, I mean, a lot of the things that are, that came up in the surveys sort of come up here. The housing issue came
Yep.
up multiple times.
Yep.
And it was in our original report, you know, we had talked about homeless young people. So, yeah, healthy and safe,
Right.
healthy and lead safe environments, those sorts of things.
Yes.
You know, they talked about the amount of municipal aid going to individual municipalities. So I made sure to cite all of those because, you know, the problems that Manchester and New Haven and Stamford and New Britain were facing haven't gone away.
Right.
So, and then the engaged piece I think is really important and timely given the disengaged, the focus on disengaged people through CCM and Dalio Education. So those are all here. And a lot of programs for education and educators are included here. And again, I think if the legislators read this document from start to finish, I think having read the individual responses from the school counselors and the community action agencies, when they get to this list, it's going to seem, you know, perfectly logical why they're included. Because a lot of the many things that they were talking about, kids needing more after-school offerings, more enrichment, those are all here.
Supported.
Yeah, support, and here again, it was the community, not just, was both the counselors and the community action agency heads talked a lot about kids and families' needs for mental health services outside of school and the lack of providers. And so I think the legislature had acknowledged that as an issue with the legislature and the administrative agencies, and had channeled federal monies to private providers. But there's, in the absence of that money, they're gonna, go back to having a hard time. So that those are included here, for example. The reading initiatives
Right.
through the Department of Education, that's still just starting, and the costs are pretty great. So those are there. And then same thing with challenged. If we want our kids to continue to be engaged, whether they're in pre-K through 12 or afterwards, we need to have opportunities for them. They need to know that there's opportunities for them, upon completion of high school.
Absolutely. And then the conclusion here.
Yeah, then just the final discussion. And again, this, I tried to tie the data that we had found and the reports that we had read to the existing literature.
Right.
And again, I cited a lot of documents, but with their updated counterparts that we had cited from the very first time we started working together.
Right.
But then, yeah, I think you're right, Christine. Yeah, we don't want to give the impression, I mean, maybe we can continue color coding, but we'll just have to make sure that we're very sort of explicit that, yes, this was addressed, but it was a time limited activity, and that the funding runs out as of thus and such.
Right. And then this has to be updated, this part.
Right, yeah, we'll add the additions, and then
Right.
we'll make sure that we make any notations that need to be made about when funding's, drying up.
Right. And maybe based upon what Irene sends us, we can look at just a bit more talking about the significance of the 6, or the respondents, the total respondents. Just maybe talk about that a little bit more, just see if we can kind of clarify how we use that data so that it seems reflective and yet as inclusive as we could, and that it supports what we're doing. So maybe just a little bit more when we get Irene, just to, that's a good point. And we know it's so hard for survey data too. But when I first read the chart, I said, how are we even going to get this data? So, it's one way, and we got enough, and it does go along with, the categories set originally by the legislature to send the funds out. So I think it does respond to what we were charged with, in a timely way, with the kind of time that we had to get this out to make it meaningful before the budget season. So.
One question I had though, Alicia, and
Yeah.
you guys, and I think I alluded to it the last time, is, a new legislature is going to be seated in January.
Right.
And so the legislature asked us, and they know full well that the guardrails are in place, but notwithstanding the existing of the financial guardrails, the legislature said, hey, you guys, which of the 2.8 billion federal dollars have been spent should we continue spending from state coffers?
Right.
So it seems like it would be almost irresponsible for us not to explicitly mention the guardrails, and that, we appreciate the legislature's, wanting to know this information, but pointing out to them that if they really want to do this, they're going to have to adjust the guardrails so as to allow for the revenues that they take in to be spent to address these issues that they've identified. Or do we want to be silent on that topic?
I'm still thinking, just letting you know why I'm silent. I'm just,
Okay.
Yeah, I know. No,
No, it's, yeah.
yeah. Well, and we don't have to have an answer today too, because I think when we make those changes that we talked about already, and you think about it some more in the next couple of weeks.
And
and
I can craft some language.
Yeah,
that
and we can
share.
highlight it, Christopher, and then share it again and see what people think.
Right.
They can look at that and maybe with some definitive language that will help people to make the decision of
Okay.
yes, or to modify it so that it does meet the needs and they're comfortable with it.
Right.
Great. Anything else for anyone? Other questions, comments?
Just hoping we didn't make Matt's eyes glaze over.
No, I'm
now
hanging
I'm
there.
up sharing so we can see him again.
Oh, you're muted, Matt.
Oh, no, I'm hanging in here. It's very interesting. And my big takeaway is the idea that COVID exacerbated all these things, I think is like the most salient, as for a person sitting in my job, that
Yeah.
these were all concerns before and that COVID made them worse, but they didn't start there.
Yeah.
No, but that they're asking us to, look into how funding could continue and which would be funded, I think is a great charge, an important charge. So we're happy that they asked us this, and hopefully the information will be helpful in making those decisions for the next budget.
Well, yeah, that seems like a good sort of approach. I'll craft some language and then we can workshop it when we meet in December. In addition to looking at the feedback that Taylor will have gotten to us about
Right.
the updates.
And we'll try to send it out, like we did this, at least give you a week. But the holiday in there, it's going to be, a little bit trickier, but depends when we get the information. As soon as Taylor gets it, I know she'll share it right away. And then we'll do that part.
Yeah.
So, overall, are people okay with this?
Yeah, I think it's great. I think the two of you pulled everything together, and it's an incredible job that you did. So thank you.
It was a tricky charge, I think, this time. I mean, important, but to get the information, especially about, again, the people who already graduated, that's a tough one. So
Well, and the fact that we weren't apprised that they had given us these new
Yes.
charges until months and months and months later.
and we really wanted to include all the work from the Blue Ribbon also, because it writes a lot there, Jennifer, too. So we, and I'm so glad that the counselor said that too. So the approach you took, Christopher, enabled us to get that information. So I really thank you for that also.
The
do
only,
you want
the
us?
on-
Oh,
oh.
sorry. Go ahead,
the
Amber,
only-
I'm sorry.
go ahead. The only wonder I have is, we hear a lot like, this is what the estimate was for this particular program. I'll just take like readiness seats or something like that. And not all the money was used. Like, I'm almost thinking like, should we like tell them kind of like, this is the priority? And I'm just using early childhood, but because it just seems like sometimes we do these reports like you two have done, and yet the money isn't spent on where it should be, at least in some hierarchy of spending.
I think we tried to do that through the verbiage before by highlighting, work that had been done with a lot of people and their findings, and a lot of groups that were very representative. I don't know if we have the ability to be able to prioritize. If I feel comfortable with that, I don't. That's a really a big charge.
I mean, I think the thing I mean, I agree with you, Anne Marie. We need to make it sort of usable by the
Right.
lawmakers. That said, I feel like I think did them a great service by taking all of this, which I know they had been asking for from OPM. But then OPM gave it to them in this format. I think we've done them a great service by just sort of like paring it down and giving them the dollar figures and categorizing them according to the 5 tenets. Hopefully this will help them make some decisions.
Maybe if we had more time, Anne Marie, too, you know, if we would have been given the charge as soon as it was actually assigned to us. Irene, you had something else?
Yeah, I wanted to check in with you. If there's other just small little things, grammatical things, do you want us to just request edit access and then just propose those changes as comments?
You should be able to comment.
Yeah, I wasn't allowed to, so that's why I'm just asking for permission to request edit access. It said I was restricted, so.
All right. I will change it to make sure everybody can comment. They can comment right there, then everybody can see the comment. That's a great idea. Thank you.
And
Sorry
it's
about
just simple, like, I'll just make
Sure,
that,
sure. Yeah.
the suggestion within the document.
Sure. I'll make that as soon as we're off the meeting. I'll make that change.
Thanks, Irene.
Yes. Anyone else? Tracy, Tanya?
I'm fine. It's great. It's a go for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya.
Thanks, Tanya.
And if you do think of anything in between, you certainly can make the comments now on the document also. And because it is that document, you also will be able to check in as we're making the changes. But then we will send it out once we feel that we have it in the next form, as soon as we do have the changes made. So you will be able to know, okay, now look at it again before what we think is the last meeting. But it should give people time to look at it then hopefully in December, right? The current legislature to look at it. What we're hoping. Before they leave. But send it to them earlier in the month. Anything else, Christopher?
I think that's it. Yeah, we just really appreciate everybody's feedback
Absolutely.
and whatever additional information you're going to share with us,
Right.
so we can get it interwoven for our next meeting, so we can discuss it one more time, approve it, and get it to the legislature.
Wonderful. Then I will adjourn the meeting at 3:54.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody, so much.
Thank
Very
you.
Thank
well.
you. Thank you for
Thank
all
you,
your work.
Taylor. Thank you.
Thanks, Taylor, as always.
We'll talk soon.
Okay.
Very good.